When Stellar Blade launched in 2024, it quickly became one of the most talked about action games of the entire year. Developed by the South Korean studio Shift Up, the game combined stylish character action combat with RPG progression systems, exploration, boss encounters, and a post-apocalyptic science fiction setting. The game follows Eve, a member of an airborne military force sent to reclaim Earth from monstrous creatures known as the Nativa. While the premise itself wasn't especially groundbreaking, it provided a strong foundation for the game's combat, world building, and its visual design. One of the biggest reasons players connected with Stellar Blade was its combat system. The game blended fast-paced action with deliberate party mechanics, rewarding players for mastering enemy patterns. Many comparisons were made to games like Nier Automata, Sekiro, Devil May Cry, but Stellar Blade itself ultimately carved out its own identity through its beta skills, burst skills, and highly satisfying boss encounters. The soundtrack, oh my god, the soundtrack also became one of the game's defining strengths. From atmospheric exploration themes to emotional vocal tracks and intense boss battle music, the OST consistently elevated the experience. Even players who had issues with certain aspects of the game often praised the music as one of its strongest components. Visually, Stellar Blade impressed with detailed environments, impressive character models, and fluid animations. It helped establish Shift Up as a developer capable of competing with much larger AAA studios. So the thing about Stellar Blade is I think the combat just really carried the experience of the game. And that doesn't take away from the other aspects of the game, because the game is comprised of many different facets that adequately add credence to the fact that this game is a banger. It's just that the combat is so satisfying, it's so fun, it's so fluid, it's so intuitive that you kind of forget about the other things that you could appreciate when it comes to this title. One of which things, for example, is the UI. Just the aesthetic of the game, the way the characters look, the way the health bar looks, the way her abilities appear on the screen. It just all looks very nice and well put together, and it's its own unique, distinct feature that you don't necessarily see in some other type of title. It's kind of, if I could best describe the way it looks, it's kind of like a futuristic video game like loading bar. That's kind of what the health bars and stuff like that look like. I know that doesn't really make sense when I describe it, but if you play the game, you'll kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about to some degree. Another part that kind of takes a backseat to the combat is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was phenomenal. Even people who didn't like the game, they could at least agree on the fact that, okay, these Koreans, this music, this is fire. That's something. The boss fights are very good. They're very fun. They're very engaging. They really disappointed. Quite frankly, they didn't disappoint me at all. I think this is one of the strongest action debuts that we have had in years. Back in 2024 when this game first came out, because when I first saw Stellar Blade, I'm like, wow, what is this? It was just something different, you know? And it's easy to spend hours at a time just listening to the OST or just roaming around in free roam, getting into fights, finding new abilities, doing side missions. It's just a good game. Now, of course, where there's good, there's bad. Despite its success, Stellar Blade was not universally praised. The most common criticism centered around its narrative. While many players found the story engaging enough to keep them invested, critics frequently argued that its plot twists, characters, and themes did not reach the heights of the games it was often compared to. Several reviewers felt the supporting cast lacked depth and that some emotional moments did not land as effectively as intended. Others pointed to pacing issues throughout the middle portions of the game. Another criticism involved some of the open area sections. While exploration was generally enjoyable, some players felt the side content occasionally slowed momentum between major story events and boss battles. Then there was the controversy surrounding Eve's appearance. Prior to launch, some online discussions focused heavily on the protagonist's character design. Critics argued the design was overly idealized, while supporters countered that stylized and attractive protagonists have always existed in gaming. A major point often overlooked during these debates was that Eve was actually modeled after a real Korean model. Rather than being an impossible fictional standard, the character's appearance was based on an actual person. For many players, the controversy felt overblown and largely disconnected from the quality of the game itself. Ultimately, most discussions surrounding Eve's design faded after release as the conversation shifted toward the game's combat, music, and overall quality. So as I said at the top of the video, the story is good, but it's not legendary. It's not God of War. It's not The Last of Us level, but it's still of passing skill. It's something that's adequate enough to get you through the game. And quite frankly, like I said, all those other components of the game is something that really makes it as opposed to breaking it. Whereas the story itself could be something that I see why people are complaining about, and they have complained about for the past few years that Stellar Blade has been out. But just the combat and the soundtrack, I think they more than make up for that. That's the first thing. When it comes to the criticism and controversies as well, I do see how the characters could have more depth to them, because even Eve herself, aside from being a part of this intergalactic military force, she comes down, she meets two other people who are there helping her, also from the military company that she is a part of. But aside from the factions they belong to, their mission for being there isn't a whole lot that's going on when it comes to character development and even just character mesh and interaction and how they gel together. They're there to achieve a common goal, but aside from their baseline dialogue about accomplishing their objectives, you really don't get to know too much about who these characters are. And especially one of the characters, particularly the guy in the game, you find out something big about him, but that's not until the end of the game, whereas there seems like there's not a whole lot of build up and lead up to that thing that you eventually see towards the game conclusion. But either way, I still think that despite the fact that these characters lack depth, I think that's just such a good first attempt at creating a mainline entry series that those things can be overlooked, at least in the short term. And then once the future games come out, you can then hold their feet to the fire and be like, okay, let's optimize this story. You've got the foundation down with the gameplay, the mechanics, the combat, the exploration, the music. You've got that. We know what to expect from that. We need to get the story optimized now. I'm just a true believer that the narrative just was not the main attraction. And then I think the Eve controversy, truly, I think that's exaggerated. And probably the people who probably complain the most are probably women who play games or women in gaming, where they're like, oh, you're objectifying us, you're doing this or that. Video games have always had attractive protagonists who are females. Maybe not nowadays because they're trying to diversify the workplace, I guess. But look at a series like Mortal Kombat. You have Melina, you have Katana, you have Jade. All the women there, they're attractive. You have games, even in sequels like Cassie Cage, Sonya Blade. Just that one franchise alone, you have attractive women. You can take things like, the Batman Arkham trilogy. Catwoman is fine as hell. I don't care what none of y'all say. She's been someone who's incredibly attractive in a video game. This is not a new concept. I don't know why it was such a big thing when Stellar Blade came out, because this is something that isn't novel to us, but people behaved in a manner as if this was some sort of foreign concept or something that is a premise that we have never operated under. But it, quite frankly, it is, and we have seen it reflective in a bunch of different titles before Stellar Blade even came out and was revealed. I think the gameplay, though, it ultimately won the conversation because, quite frankly, the complaints about that and the controversy in and of itself, it's stupid, it's unfounded. And in lieu of all of these criticisms and controversies, Stellar Blade succeeded because it understood its strengths. Not every game needs to be a narrative masterpiece to be memorable. The combat system consistently rewarded mastery, boss encounters demanded attention, progression felt meaningful, the soundtrack amplified nearly every major moment. Perhaps most importantly, Stellar Blade launched as a complete package with a clear identity. It wasn't trying to be everything at once. It knew it was an action game first and delivered accordingly. By the time the PC version arrived, the game's audience had grown significantly, helping establish Stellar Blade as one of PlayStation's most successful modern action franchises and positioning Shift Up for a major follow-up. So to summarize that in a sentence, Shift Up understood the assignment. They knew exactly what they wanted to accomplish with their game. They knew what they were trying to do. They knew what they weren't trying to do, and they stuck to that. They weren't trying to make a 60-hour plus single-player campaign mode that was a narrative masterpiece objectively. They were trying to make something that was fun to play with their own unique style by adding a Korean model as the protagonist, which is something that I'm grateful for, So they knew exactly what they wanted it to be. It's a strong foundation for a franchise, I think. And I think the combat and the music itself, that is the Shift Up brand. Not necessarily the story, but the other mechanics that comprise their games.
지금 넥서스 섹터 방향으로 가는 외선 순환 열차가 들어오고 있습니다. The outer circle line train bound for Nexus sector is now arriving. Please wait for everyone to exit.
Revealed during Summer Game Fest 2026, Stellar Blade Blood Rain is the next major installment in the franchise. Rather than simply calling it Stellar Blade 2, Shift Up chose the subtle Blood Rain, signaling that this project may be both a continuation and an evolution of the series. The game continues the universe established in the original title but introduces a brand new protagonist named Evie. According to Shift Up, Blood Rain takes place after the events of the first game and will expand the world in new directions. The reveal trailer showcased a much denser urban environment than many of the locations seen in the original game, rather than vast ruined wastelands. Blood Rain appears to emphasize towering futuristic cityscapes and crowded metropolitan areas. Shift Up has confirmed the project is still in early development and has not yet announced a release window. So Crossfire, probably Attack on Titan 3, and then this was especially the biggest surprise for me from Summer Game Fest that we had a few weeks ago. It's kind of like more cyberpunk vibes. I haven't played cyberpunk, but based on what I've seen of the aesthetic of that game, it kind of looks like that. The city setting looks incredible, and as I explained earlier while the trailer was playing, the first game emphasized more so areas that have been devoid of human life, and it wasn't as population dense. Whereas this, you're literally thrusted into a city, into a downtown-like metropolitan area, as opposed to being in some dry desert in the middle of nowhere fighting monsters, which I had no problem with doing that. So I'm just hopeful for a release window for this soon, and I just had no idea that this was even in development, and I did not expect it at all. Now, one of the most immediate differences that I noticed while watching this was the combat style of the new protagonist, Evie. In the original Stellar Blade, Eve primarily relied on her signature blade weapon, creating combat encounters built around swordplay, precision timing, parries, and flashy finishing attacks. Evie appears to fight very differently. The reveal trailer heavily emphasized punches, kicks, gauntlet attacks, and close-range brawling, while some footage hints at a secondary blade-like weapon. Hand-to-hand combat appears to be the centerpiece of her moveset. If this direction remains intact, Blood Rain could fundamentally change the feel of combat while preserving the stylish action that defined the original game. This approach would also help differentiate Evie from Eve. Rather than feeling like a simple replacement protagonist, she already appears to have her own combat identity herself. So the gauntlet combat, it looks awesome. Who even needs a sword? It was pretty cool how Eve, her sword literally served as like a hairpin. She would pull it out of her hair and then it would become her blade. Whereas I think we will probably have something similar to this. Maybe not necessarily a hairpin because her hair is shorter, obviously, but some sort of accessory that she'll probably wear that accentuates her appearance but also serves as a modality of protection. So whether that might be a sword, whether it might be some other kind of weapon that could serve as a secondary weapon, that would be nice to see. But I think primarily fist fighting, close range combat, the gauntlets, I think that's the differentiating factor here and what makes her more distinct from Eve. The fighting style also looks far more aggressive, whereas Eve was much more based in fluidity, into the flow of combat, into sword play. It was an elegance to the way she fought, whereas with Evie, she doesn't care. It's just no hopes barred. She's just going in. It's fighting, it's aggressive, it's hand to hand, a lot of lightning fast attacks. She's very quick. So it feels incredibly more faster and more brutal than the way Eve fought in the first game, where she had a more of a gracious approach to her fighting style. I think the fact that they have two distinct styles, I think that already sets them apart, and you can clearly tell Evie from Eve, not only in appearance, but we don't know much about personality and mannerisms yet, but definitely in terms of their combat, you can tell the two apart. I'm just curious how the boss fights will evolve and how that will add further differentiation between the two characters and the two stories that they underwent in their own respective journeys. So with Blood Rain specifically, the strongest opportunity for improvement is definitely narrative improvement. With the combat foundation already established, Shift Up now has a chance to elevate the storytelling and character development. Fans are also hoping for deeper side characters, stronger emotional payoffs, and more meaningful exploration content. Since the original game's combat visuals and soundtrack were already highly regarded, maintaining those strengths while improving the narrative could significantly raise the overall quality of the sequel. Early reactions to the reveal have already largely been positive, particularly regarding Evie's design, the new setting, and the apparent evolution of combat mechanics. Stellar Blade proved that Shift Up could create a successful AAA action franchise. Its combat, music, visual presentation, and memorable boss encounters earned a passionate fan base despite criticism of its narrative and its pacing. Blood Rain appears poised to build upon that foundation with a new protagonist, a fresh setting, and a potentially reimagined combat system centered around hand-to-hand combat. While details remain limited, the reveal trailer has already generated significant excitement amongst the fans. The biggest question now is simple: when will we actually get to play it? So aside from a few other titles, this is one of my most anticipated games. The combat already looks promising. Evie has a lot to prove, but I don't think that is going to be a problem based on what we've seen just from this 3-minute trailer here. You can get a small snippet of the soundtrack playing in the background. That already sounds like a banger. You can see the combat itself. Clearly, they have innovated and they have improved it, and they have given Evie her own distinct persona and combat style. And I think the sky's the limit. The expectations are already sky high, and what we need now, a release date, a release window. When can we expect this? When will pre-orders become live? How far in development are you? Because based on this, it seems like they've been working on this for a substantial amount of time. So I guess the specifics is all we're really needing right now, something concrete. And Blood Rain could be Shift Up's next big leap forward. And who knows, we could have a Stellar Blade 3, 4, 5, you never know. But based on how this is progressing now, I think we have good things in store for us. Well, let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or you disagree. I'm Harlem. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.